The sky was a tired shade of blue that afternoon. Not the kind you write songs about. No, it was more like a page from an old letter, faded, wrinkled at the edges. I was walking the stretch of sand near Monterey, the place I go when the noise of the world gets a little too sharp. The waves were modest that day, like they didn't want to bother anyone, just enough wind to remind me I was still breathing. And then I saw it. A life ring. Faded orange, cracked in places, but still floating like it had one job left in it. The letters were barely readable, but I knew them. SS Morning Finch. And just like that, my knees didn't feel like my own. The world pulled back like a curtain, and I was 22 again, boarding that damn ship with a duffel bag full of borrowed courage and the kind of fear that doesn't speak until midnight. I didn't grow up near the sea. Kansas boy. Wheat and dust. But something about the idea of the ocean, that infinite, moody beast, called me louder than the farm ever did. I remember the first brochure I saw, folded in the back of an worn-out library book. Join the merchant marine, see the world, be the man you're meant to be. Hell, I didn't even know what a merchant marine was. But I knew I didn't want to grow old wondering what the ocean smelled like. So I enrolled in the Maritime Academy in Galveston. I sold my pickup, kissed a girl I wouldn't write to, and told my mom I'd be back for Thanksgiving. I wasn't. The academy wasn't like the brochures. Salt didn't smell like adventure. It stung. It scratched. It got in your gums and made your coffee taste like rust. There were older men there, some ex-Navy, some just lost souls like me trying to stitch meaning into their 20s. They taught us how to stand on a heaving deck without vomiting, how to tie knots blindfolded, how to read a sky like scripture, and how to keep your hands moving when the body wanted to quit. There was a kid from Detroit who played harmonica at night, and a guy from Georgia who swore the ocean whispered your name if you stayed up long enough. I believed him. Funny how a piece of plastic washed ashore can pull a life out of your ribs like that. Standing there with my shoes sinking into the wet sand, that ring wasn't just a piece of old equipment. It was a chapter I thought had closed. But maybe life doesn't work like that. Maybe the ocean doesn't let you forget. That day, as the wind picked up and the gulls started circling like old memories, I sat down beside that ring and let the rest come flooding back. And God, there was so much more to remember. The first time I stepped foot on the SS Morning Finch, it didn't feel real. The ship was a steel colossus, humming with life, a breathing, grinding beast. The air was a strange mix of diesel, rust, and something almost sweet, like old rope that had soaked in 100 storms. Men moved along the deck like they were born there, calloused hands, sun-creased faces, eyes that didn't blink at the sea. I was green, too clean. Even my boots looked like they didn't belong. The chief engineer, Morales, gave me one look and said, "Don't worry, kid. By next week, you'll smell like the rest of us." And he wasn't wrong. That scent of sweat, engine grease, and wet metal stuck to you like your own shadow. It wasn't pleasant, but it became home. We were docked in Seattle that day. I remember the seagulls being loud and arrogant, and the dock hands yelling in 3 languages. But what I remember most was the silence inside me. That cold, weighty silence that comes when you're about to change and know you can't turn back. I had no idea how many ports I'd see, or how many storms would scream my name at 3 a.m. All I knew was this: I wasn't the same man who boarded that ship. My first assignment was simple: deckhand. Coil the lines, scrub the deck, stay out of the way. And I did. I kept my mouth shut and eyes open. Learned more in the first month than 4 years of school ever taught me. Like how coffee brewed at sea tastes like burnt hope. and how the hum of the engine room can lull you into a sleep deeper than any lullaby. There was a rhythm to life aboard. Mornings started before sunrise, steel boots echoing on metal stairs, hands gripping hot mugs. Someone always cursed under their breath. Someone always laughed a little too loud. Then came the work. Tightening bolts that fought back, loading cargo that could crush your spine, keeping balance on a ship that never stopped moving. And in between, the small things that made it human. A card game in the mess hall, a joke scribbled in grease on a bulkhead. Letters passed between ports, opened with trembling hands. Some brought tears, some silence. At night, I'd sit alone near the stern, watch the foam trails shimmer under moonlight. It was the loneliest peace I've ever known, and the most honest. Now, standing here with that life ring at my feet, I wonder how many young men still chase oceans. How many of them know the beauty and violence of water? How many carry a version of themselves they only met out at sea? The wind shifts again, brings with it the sting of salt and the distant cry of something wild. And I swear, for a moment, I smell the old deck again. The paint, the sweat, the steel. God, it didn't feel like me back then, but it was. By the second year, the sea was no longer a stranger. It was a roommate. Loud, unpredictable, and sometimes beautiful. We'd run up the Pacific coast that spring, Vancouver to Anchorage, hauling containers, supplies, and the occasional secret no one ever talked about. The water was black and sharp like obsidian. Mountains loomed like ancient gods, and every sunrise looked like the world apologizing for what it had done the night before. Morales, the engineer, taught me how to listen to the ship. "She tells you what's wrong," he'd say, tapping a metal pipe, "if you shut up long enough to hear her." I never thought steel could speak, but I swear, late at night, when the rest of the crew was asleep or pretending to be, I'd hear her groan, stretch, breathe, like she remembered everyone who'd ever sailed her and mourned them. We kept a corkboard near the crew bunks. Pinned on it were letters from home, kids' drawings, Polaroids, notes that smelled like perfume or tasted like goodbye. Mine came less often. My mother's handwriting shrank over the years. My brother stopped writing altogether. And the girl I kissed before leaving Kansas sent one final postcard that simply read, "I waited, then I didn't." No return address. It stung, but out at sea, grief had no room to fester. You either let it go, or it dragged you down like an anchor to the ribs. There was a cook named Donnelly, big Irish guy with forearms like tree trunks. He baked cinnamon bread every Friday, said it kept the madness off the walls. He played jazz on an old cassette deck in the galley, and sometimes, when the weather was calm, he'd dance, just 2 or 3 slow steps between boiling pots and clanking trays. He said it reminded him of his wife, said she liked to spin barefoot on tile floors. He never got a letter, not one, but he smiled more than anyone I've ever met. That year, we lost a man overboard. Not to death, to love. We docked in San Francisco for 72 hours. He met a girl at a bookstore, tall, sharp, beautiful in a quiet kind of way. He told the captain the next morning, "I'm not getting back on." Just like that, he was gone, left his boots in the locker. And a note that simply read, "I think I found a different kind of ocean." No one was mad. Some of us envied him. Funny how people think being a sailor is about adventure. It's not. It's about absence, about holding on to what's slipping, about remembering who you are when no one's around to tell you.
I ran my fingers along that life ring again. The paint flaked like old memories. And in the quiet, I heard Morales's voice, and Donnelly's laugh, and the sound of jazz between steel walls. This ring, it wasn't just equipment. It was a monument. Some ports were nothing but steel and smoke, rough hands, cold beer, and the sound of forklifts echoing through concrete. Others, they carved themselves into you. Singapore was the first place I felt the world shift under me, not from the sea, but from the sheer newness of everything. The air was thick, sweet with jasmine and diesel. Lanterns hung like soft memories above narrow alleys, and people moved fast, like they were racing the heat. I bought a carved wooden box from a quiet vendor near the harbor. He didn't speak, just wrapped it gently, handed it over, and nodded. I kept letters in that box for years. Still have it. Still smells like incense and engine oil. In Marseille, I met a woman who painted ships, not scenes of them, the ships themselves. Said she believed each hull had a soul and it deserved color. She painted the Morning Finch's stern a deep green, right below the nameplate. Told me green meant long life and safe return. I didn't believe in signs, but after that, I stopped drinking on departure days, just in case. Then there was Chile, Port of Valparaiso. That's where I saw a man get on his knees and kiss the dock. We all laughed, but he didn't care. Said he'd been gone too long. Said the land felt like a promise kept. Not every stop was romantic. In Manila, I got food poisoning so bad I thought I'd meet God in a cargo crate. In Liverpool, I got into a bar fight defending a man I barely knew. He later gave me his pocket knife, said it saved him once. Funny, I still have it, though I never learned his name. There was this rhythm to leaving a port. Ropes slapping water, engines grumbling awake, men growing quiet. Everyone watched the city lights drift back into sky. No one ever said it, but each departure felt like leaving part of yourself behind. And each return, a test. Would the people remember you? Would your kids still call you dad without hesitating? Would the house still smell like home? That's the part no one tells young sailors, that every new city takes a piece, and you never quite get them all back. I looked down at the life ring again. Sand stuck to it like barnacles of memory. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered the names of places I hadn't said out loud in decades. Not to remember them, but to let them know I hadn't forgotten. It's strange the things you remember when the world gets quiet. Not the big moments, not medals, storms, or promotions, but the sound of a bunk creaking as your best friend rolls over in the middle of the night. The way a wrench feels warm in your hand after hours in the engine room. The silence that follows after a crewmate tells you his daughter didn't recognize him on a video call. That's what stays. By my 10th year aboard, I knew the Morning Finch like my own hands. Every groan in her spine, every temperamental gauge and misbehaving valve. She wasn't a ship anymore. She was a partner. A witness, a confessional. We had a rotation of new kids then, green as I'd once been. They showed up cocky, loud, reeking of cologne and energy drinks, and one by one, the sea knocked them down, smoothed out their edges, and taught them the same truth it taught me. You don't conquer the ocean. You just make peace with her. Then, there were the goodbyes. You didn't get used to them. Not really. Sometimes a man just left. Contract ended. Never saw him again. No farewell, no speech. Just an empty bunk and a dent in the metal locker where he used to hang his coat. Other times, it hit harder. Like when Cam, my bunkmate of 5 years, stood on the dock in Yokohama and hugged me like he knew I'd never come back. He had tears. Some nights, after we left a port and the lights behind us sank into blackness, I'd lie awake in my bunk and wonder if I was still the same man who had boarded the Finch all those years ago. The ocean doesn't ask for permission to change you. It just does.
Day by day, wave by wave, you start with wide eyes and restless bones. You leave with hands that shake when they're still too long, and a heart that remembers too many names. I think about the men we lost along the way. Not to death, but to time, to silence, to life pulling them in different directions. One by one they drifted. The harmonica player from Detroit never came back after shore leave in Manila. No note, just his bunk, still smelling faintly of oil and citrus. We all assumed he found something better, a reason to stay on land. Love, maybe, or just peace. You never asked. You learned not to. On a ship, if you opened that door too wide, you'd drown in other people's absences. I think about Polly, the youngest deckhand we ever had. He had freckles, a busted front tooth, and he read science fiction late into the night. Said he wanted to be an astronaut when he was a kid, but ships were the closest he could get to the stars. He used to climb to the highest point on the deck, tie himself in with rope, and just watch. The sea, the sky, the way the stars shifted. He'd whisper, "We're so small, Cap." I was never a captain, but he called everyone Cap after his dad. He left the ship after his 3rd year, said he missed his sister, said he'd had enough of being a ghost in other people's lives. I heard from a friend that he went back to school. Teaches physics now. Still looks up at the sky, I hope. You see, it's not the storms I remember. Not the way the deck bucked under our feet. Not the way the rain stung like needles. Not even the terror of watching waves taller than buildings crash over us. I remember what came after. The calm. The quiet. The way we all sat around the galley table, soaking wet, eating cold beans, laughing like fools just because we'd survived another one. Because we were still breathing, still here. That kind of laughter can't be faked. It comes from a place in your gut that only fear and love can reach. Back on land, people ask what the job was like. And I never know how to answer. Because how do you explain that your job wasn't just on a ship, but inside of it? Inside the hum, the groan, the endless creak of steel and tide. Inside the stories, the goodbyes, the silences that echoed louder than words ever could. How do you explain that sometimes, when I close my eyes in the dark, I still feel the gentle sway of the ocean beneath me, not just in memory, but in my bones? That life ring at my feet? It's more than driftwood. It's a key to a door I thought I'd locked, to a younger man I thought I'd buried, but he's still here, somewhere in the tide, still watching the stars, still listening for the hum of the hull, still trying to figure out what kind of man the sea made him. I missed the birth of my daughter, not because I wanted to,
but because we were 5 days out from Osaka, caught in the tail of a typhoon, and there wasn't a phone for 100 miles. The ship pitched so violently that week, we had to lash the chairs in the galley to the floor. Pots slammed against steel walls. Men wore bruises like tattoos. Sleep was a memory. And when the storm passed, when the sun cracked open the clouds like a warm yolk, I found a message waiting in the captain's hands. It's a girl, 7 pounds, healthy, beautiful. She looks like you. I read it 5 times, then folded it into my shirt pocket like it was something sacred, and I didn't speak for the rest of the day. When I finally held her, 3 weeks later, in a small hospital in Long Beach, she was already making eye contact, like she knew I was late, like she had questions. I didn't have answers, just a trembling hand and a heart so full it ached. Her name was Claire. Her skin smelled like new mornings, and when she gripped my finger for the first time, something in me cracked wide open, something no storm had ever touched. I tried to stay on land for a while after that, took jobs at the port, supervising cargo, fixing old cranes, watching ships leave without me. But it never stuck. Every time the ocean breathed, I heard my name in the wind. So I went back, again and again. I missed first steps, first words.
School plays. 2 birthdays. She never said it to my face, but Claire stopped drawing me in her family portraits when she was 6. I only found out because my wife cried one night in the kitchen, whispering, "She's starting to think fathers are just voices in telephones." That hurt more than anything the sea ever threw at me. And God knows she threw a lot. I tried harder after that. Video calls when I could, recording myself reading bedtime stories to send home, letters tucked into lunchboxes, postcards from ports that smelled like foreign spices and diesel. But there's only so much you can do when your heart is split between tide and tile floors. Claire's older now, has her own kids. She forgave me, I think, or maybe just accepted the man I was. She still calls me every Sunday, tells me about soccer practice, grocery lists, how the youngest likes to watch ships go by. And every time I hear her voice, it pulls something ancient from my chest, something soft, something that still wishes I'd stayed. I look at that life ring again and I see more than rust and rope. I see 100 small moments I missed, and the one miracle I didn't deserve, a daughter who waited anyway. You don't talk about fear on a ship. Not really. Not when it grabs your ribs in the middle of the night because you dreamed of water swallowing the hull whole. Not when the storm roars louder than your thoughts, and you're gripping cold steel, whispering promises to a god you only remember when the lightning gets close. And not when you're standing on a silent deck, just after someone falls overboard, staring into the black, hoping for a voice, and hearing nothing. Nothing. It happened once, somewhere off the coast of Nova Scotia. We were headed back from a cargo drop, cold winds slicing through the metal like it hated us. Jake, he was maybe 30, a joker, a Red Sox fan, the kind of guy who lit up a room just by entering it. He liked crossword puzzles and playing harmonica at sunrise, and he was fast on ladders, maybe too fast. That morning, he was gone. Just gone. No one saw him fall, no splash, no shout, just an empty patch of deck, and his cap wedged under the rail. We turned the ship around. We searched. My God, we searched. For hours, eyes burning from salt and prayer. But the sea is a selfish thing. It keeps what it takes. We held a small ceremony that night. Donnelly lit a candle in the galley and played Miles Davis. Morales said a few words that didn't make sense but somehow felt right. And I wrote Jake's name in my journal, pressed the page closed, and never opened it again. You carry ghosts out there. Not like the kind in stories.
These ones don't rattle chains or speak in riddles. They just sit beside you when the wind dies down. They breathe through the pipes. They live in the empty chair across the table. They hum inside the creak of the bunk when no one's in it. Back home, people ask if I ever saw anything spooky. They want sea monsters, haunted lighthouses, mermaids with sharp teeth. But the truth is this: the scariest thing at sea is absence, the quiet after something vanishes, the way the ocean pretends it never knew their name. Even now, as I stand here on the shore, with this old life ring at my feet, I think of Jake and the others, not always with sorrow, but with respect. They gave their years to the water. Some gave more. And when the night gets quiet, when even the tide seems to hold its breath, I swear I can hear them. Not crying, not shouting, just there, still aboard, still watching the horizon. Retirement doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, like rust. At first, it feels like a vacation. You wake when you want, drink coffee that doesn't slosh in a tin cup, and walk down streets that don't sway beneath your feet. But then it starts. That silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums like an empty hull. That low echo in your chest when you realize no one's waiting on you to show up anymore. No knots to tie, no engines to check, no eyes watching your hands for instruction. You're not needed. Just here.
I remember my last day aboard the Morning Finch. They gave me a cake, cheap icing, said "Fair Winds, Ray" in crooked blue letters. We laughed, told stories that got bigger with every retelling. Even the new guys stood for the toast. I smiled, shook hands, patted backs, but deep down, I was grieving. Because when you leave the sea, you leave more than a job. You leave a version of yourself that only ever existed out there. A man made of salt, pressure, ritual, and long stretches of sky. I moved back inland, someplace quiet, affordable. Built a shed, tried hobbies, watched TV shows about boats and muttered corrections under my breath. Every now and then, someone from the old crew would call. We'd talk about grandkids, cholesterol, and the price of gas. But always, the conversation circled back to the ocean. Like it had gravity. Like we were still caught in its pull. Once, I got a call from Cam. He was drunk, lonely. Said his hands still twitched at night like he was climbing the mast. Said his wife didn't understand why he stared at the sink for 10 minutes straight. I told him I did the same. That sometimes I'd wake up and panic, thinking I'd missed my shift in the engine room. That my house felt too still, too safe. You never really get used to life on land. You just soften around it, like a rope worn smooth after years in the sun. People talk to you different when they know you've been at sea. They think you're brave, or broken, or both. They don't know that most days you're just trying to figure out how to exist without a horizon. How to breathe without salt in your nose. How to love people without fearing that you'll vanish again. I picked up the life ring from the sand today. It was heavier than I expected. Not from the water, but from memory. From weight that doesn't belong to the body, but to the years. I carried it home, cleaned it off, hung it on the back fence. Some might think it's decoration, but I know better. It's a marker, a signpost, a reminder that somewhere out there, a younger version of me is still standing on a steel deck, watching the sky blush before dawn, waiting for the world to turn.
Retirement, I've come to understand, isn't simply stepping away from work, it's stepping away from an identity you spent decades shaping. For me, that identity was bound tightly to the sea, to the steel bones of the morning finch, to the smell of diesel mingling with salt spray, and the steady rhythm of waves beating against the hull. The first weeks on solid ground were a revelation and a betrayal. The earth was still beneath my feet, but I felt adrift, untethered from the pulse that had guided me through youth and middle age. The creak of wood in a quiet house replaced the comforting groan of the ship's bulkheads. The silence that filled the rooms was louder than any storm I had weathered. I still remember the morning after my final voyage. The crew gathered on the dock, faces weathered and familiar, smiles lined with sadness and pride. We toasted with cheap beer and told the same stories we had told 100 times before, each retelling bigger and brighter than the last. They handed me a plaque, engraved with my name and years of service, an object as cold and steady as the compass etched in its corner. I smiled, shook hands, tried to hold back the knot in my throat. But inside, something was breaking. Something I hadn't noticed before. I was not just leaving a job, I was leaving a life. A life made up of salt-stung skin, endless horizons, and a brotherhood forged by shared hardship and hope.
Days turned to weeks. I built a small shed in the backyard where I stored bits of my seafaring past, a worn leather jacket, a rusted sextant, bundles of rope still knotted from years aboard. I tried to fill my days with gardening and quiet walks, but my mind kept drifting back to the ship, to the endless expanse of water that had once seemed so vast and inviting. The ocean, I realized, was a part of me. Not just a place or a job, but a force that had shaped my soul. Without it, I was like a sailor lost in a desert, surrounded by familiar things, yet utterly disconnected. Sometimes I would lie awake in the dead of night, feeling the absence of the ship's steady sway like a physical ache. The silence of my home was suffocating. I missed the sound of engines humming in the dark, the shuffle of boots on steel decks, the distant call of a foghorn across the water. I missed the camaraderie, the rough jokes, the shared meals, the quiet understanding between men who had faced storms together and come out the other side. I called old friends from the crew, voices ragged with age and longing. We talked about grandchildren, aches, and the rising price of fuel. But always the conversation circled back to the sea. It held us in its grip, even when we were far from its reach. One evening, I received a call from Cam, my old bunkmate. His voice was heavy with loneliness and regret. He told me how his hands still trembled at night, as if climbing the rigging, how his wife didn't understand the restless silence that filled his hours. I shared my own fears, the panic of waking to find myself nowhere but in an empty room, the struggle to breathe without the ocean salt in my lungs. We were both men caught between worlds, too old for the life we left behind, too restless for the quiet we were supposed to embrace. Now, when I walk the shore near Monterey, I carry that weathered life ring home with me. It's heavier than it looks, not from water, but from the memories it holds. It's a weight of years spent in the service of the sea, the lives lost and found, the loves missed and held on to in fleeting moments. I hung it on my backyard fence, a silent testament to the part of me that will always stand on a ship's deck, gazing at the horizon as dawn breaks and the world begins anew. Years at sea aren't just about the water and the work. They're about the battles you fight inside, quiet, unseen, relentless. I was a young man when I first felt it, the gnawing doubt, the ache that no storm could explain. You learn to push it down, to bury it beneath the clang of machinery and the salt spray, but it lingers, like a shadow, stretching longer each day. The endless rhythm of work, checking gauges, tightening bolts, hauling lines, was a refuge, a distraction from the quiet voice that asked, "Who will I be when the sea no longer calls me?" That question haunted me on long nights. While others dreamed of land and family, I dreamed of purpose, of belonging. But the sea was a harsh teacher. It took friendships, tested loyalties, and showed me the limits of endurance. Some days the weight of responsibility felt like chains, other days like wings. I remember the look in Morales's eyes the day I told him I was thinking of retiring. He was quiet, stoic as always, but I saw the flicker of loss there. "Don't let the sea forget you," he said softly. "Its memory is long, but not always kind." His words stayed with me, like the hum of the engine that never quite dies, even when the ship is still. Battles with yourself aren't the kind people talk about. You wear your scars under calloused skin and your fears behind a steady gaze. But they shape you, define you. The loneliness, the isolation, the aching homesickness, they were as much a part of my journey as the storms and the ports. Back on shore, I realized those battles didn't end with retirement. They changed shape, from the roar of the ocean to the silence of an empty room. But I was still fighting, still learning how to live in a world that didn't move with the tide. Now when I hold that life ring, I feel the weight of those battles. Not as burdens, but as the price of having loved something bigger than myself.
In the endless blue, where the horizon blurs and time folds into itself, friendship becomes the lifeline you never knew you needed. It's forged not in quiet cafes or sunny parks, but in the claustrophobic, salt-stained corridors of a ship that never truly sleeps. I still see them clearly, those faces, worn by sun and wind, etched with lines that told stories far older than any of us. There was Donnelly, the cook, with a laugh so big it could shake the rigging, and Morales, the gruff engineer whose quiet wisdom was the compass we followed. And Cam, my bunkmate, whose eyes held a softness that didn't quite fit with the roughness around him.
We weren't just crewmates. We were brothers, bound by shared fears, shared hopes, and shared silence. We carried each other through storms and heartbreaks, offered strength when someone faltered, and celebrated the small victories: a clear sky, a safe port, a letter from home. There were nights when the ocean was merciless, when waves threatened to tear us apart, and the cold bit deep into our bones. But those nights, we'd gather in the mess hall, huddle close, and share stories that kept the darkness at bay. Friendship was the warmth in the damp chill, the steady hand on a trembling shoulder, the voice that said, "You're not alone." It was the secret we guarded fiercely against the loneliness that tried to sneak in between the steel walls. Now, years later, when the quiet of retirement settles like fog, I find comfort in those memories. In the laughter and tears shared over chipped mugs and fading lantern light. Those friendships shaped me, kept me sane, made the ocean feel like home. I run my fingers over that life ring again, and I'm not just holding a relic. I'm holding a testament to the men who stood beside me, to the bonds that outlasted storms, to the gift of friendship that saved us all. Love at sea is a strange, fragile thing, like a message in a bottle tossed into an endless, restless ocean, carried by currents you cannot control, always hoping it reaches the shore. When I first met her, I was docked in Charleston for 3 days, the kind of short stay that feels both like a blessing and a curse. Her name was Mary. She worked at a small cafe near the docks, with eyes that held a calm I desperately needed, and a smile that could quiet the roar of an angry sea. We didn't talk much at first, a shared coffee here, a brief walk along the harbor there. She told me about her dreams of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the Atlantic coastline. I told her I worked on a ship. She laughed softly, asked if I ever felt lonely out there. I didn't answer. Days turned into weeks. Letters followed. Each one a lifeline, tied together by ink and longing. I'd read her words beneath a starry sky, the engine's hum a steady companion. They reminded me of home, of warmth beyond the steel walls, of a future I dared to imagine. But love at sea means knowing the distance is both enemy and protector, that every goodbye might be final, that every return may find things changed, people changed, or worse, waiting to be left behind. Mary waited. She never stopped. Even when storms kept me silent for weeks, even when the mail missed ports, even when the ocean seemed determined to keep us apart. Our love wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, anchored in letters, phone calls, and stolen moments. And when I finally stepped off the Morning Finch for the last time, it was Mary who was there, waiting on the dock, her arms open like a harbor after a long voyage. That love carried me home, kept me anchored, when the sea no longer did. I glance at that life ring one last time today, and I think of Mary, the shore I never wanted to leave behind. The last voyage felt different, not because the sea had changed, but because I had. Years of salt and wind had carved their marks deep into my skin and soul. The waves that once called me with wild promises now whispered softly, like an old friend saying goodbye. The Morning Finch creaked familiar songs as we pulled away from the harbor for what I knew would be the last time. The salty breeze carried memories, laughs in the mess hall, the weight of a life ring passed between hands, the scent of diesel and seaweed mingled with dreams.
At every port, I watched the world pass by, knowing I was leaving a part of myself behind. The laughter of the crew, the glint of lanterns in the night, the endless horizon stretching out like a promise, all became echoes fading into twilight. When the retirement ceremony came, it wasn't the plaque or the speeches that stayed with me. It was the quiet look in the eyes of my crewmates, a shared understanding that no matter where we went next, the sea would always be a part of us. Now, on the shore where I first saw that drifting life ring, I feel a calm I never knew I needed. The ocean's song is softer here, a lullaby for a man who spent his life chasing tides and finally found his peace. The ring hangs on my fence, weathered and worn, a symbol of a journey that shaped me, taught me love and loss, and brought me home. The sea gave me many things: friendship, fear, hope, and heartbreak. But above all, it gave me a story. one I carry with me, as steady as the tide. Standing on the shore, the ocean stretched endlessly before me. Familiar, yet changed, much like myself. The life ring at my feet was weathered, battered, but still whole. It carried the weight of years, memories, and the countless moments that shaped a man who once thought the ocean held all the answers. I was no longer the young sailor who chased horizons with reckless hope. I was a man who had seen the tides of time pull loved ones away and bring others close, who had faced storms fierce enough to tear the sky apart and quiet moments deep enough to hear his own soul. I thought about the boy I was, the one who believed the ocean held all the answers, and the man I became, who understood the ocean asked more questions than it gave, who learned that sometimes the bravest journey isn't across the waves, but back to the people waiting on the shore. My daughter, my friends, the faces of those who stood beside me in calm and chaos, they were the true compass points that guided me home. And though the sea's call will never fully fade, I've found peace in the land that holds their hands. I touched the life ring once more before leaving it hanging on the fence, a symbol of a past that shaped me and a future I was finally ready to embrace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting gold over the water, I whispered a quiet thanks to the ocean for its lessons, its love, its loss. And I walked forward, steady, weathered, and finally whole.